You know, it's kind of cute when you get to this point of the story and you realize, can you believe you used to one time think that Daryl was a Mary Sue? Hello, bookworms and howlers. Mike back to talk some more Red Rising, guys. Today we're going back to 2018 for Iron Gold, guys. This is the fourth book in the Red Rising saga, but it's become more affectionately known as book one of the sequel series. So the series was originally meant to be a trilogy. Pierce Brown did say that he didn't ever plan to really revisit it, but he did say he had some things that he felt like he could go off of, and he went back after a 3-year hiatus to the world of Red Rising, to Darrow and all of those friends. And guys, we are here to talk about Iron Gold today. So like I said, this is kind of known as the sequel series because it is quite different, I think, than the original trilogy. And I've talked about those reasons on the channel, but I'll talk about them a little bit more. Traditionally, guys, it feels like of people who have read all 5 books, Iron Gold seems to be like the whipping boy of the fandom. It always seems to come in last place for people, or maybe book 1 in last place and this one right underneath it. But you never really heard any people say very many nice things about it. When I read it for the first time, I kind of went into it with low expectations, and I really, really did enjoy it. So did I feel the same on this reread? Well, we're going to talk about that today, guys. And let's begin by talking about what is this book about. Now, they call him Father, Liberator, Warlord, Slave King, Reaper. But he feels a boy as he falls toward the war-torn planet, his armor red and his army vast with his heart heavy. It is the 10th year of war and his 33rd of his life. A decade ago, Darrow was a hero for the revolution, and he believed he would break the chains of society. But the Rising has shattered everything. Instead of peace and freedom, it has brought endless war. Now he must risk all that he has fought for on one last desperate mission. Darrow still believes he can save everyone, but can he save himself? And throughout the worlds, other destinies entwine with Darrow to change his fate forever. A young red girl flees tragedy in a refugee camp and achieves for herself a new life she never could have imagined. An ex-soldier broken by grief is forced to steal the most valuable thing in the galaxy, or pay with his life. And Lysander Alloon, the heir in exile to the Sovereign, wanders the stars with his mentor Cassius, haunted by the loss of the world that Darrow transformed, and dreaming of what will rise from its ashes, guys. This takes us back to 2018. Book number 1, I'm going to say, of the sequel series. This is Iron Gold. Now, when we begin, like usual, guys, talk about what makes this book good or bad. I'm going to start with the good. I feel like the switch to multi-POV was a great idea. So instead of just Darrow's first-person narrative that we've gone through the first 3 books, this you have 4 points of view. That's going to be, obviously, you still have Darrow. That's a big one there. You have Lysander Alloon, who is a little older now, obviously. Then we have 2 new characters, Lyria and Ephraim. Now, these characters, I'm not going to give you too much about these guys because I don't want you to know too much about them. But I do want you to know that there are 4 POV characters, 2 are new characters, and we'll get a little bit more into those as we go along here. But what I like about this multi-POV is, look, I struggle with first-person POV. Because I feel like Pierce Brown's a writer in that original trilogy that always tried to trick his readers a little bit. He always like to do the gotcha, as I like to call them. And with this, that eliminates that problem. You're not inside the main character's head every single chapter, so you don't always know what the plan is, and you don't have to hide those things. They can just happen off the page or when you're on someone else's point of view. I like that. But I like it gives you the opportunity to see Darrow and Virginia and just the Rising as a whole from other people's point of view. You know, are they kind of mythical figures? Are they tyrants? What are they? And I think getting to see that from other points of view really does help kind of make the story change a little bit than we've been used to in those first 3 books. And I think that's just what makes it really, really great, because the series does feel more grown up now. And it's not just because it's darker by content, but the characters are aged up. There's 10 years after the end of Morningstar, and these characters are a little more war-torn, a little more battle-weary, and much more jaded. You know, just like happens when you get to your 30s and you realize, everything's not like it was when I was a kid. You know, and these characters were very much kids flying by the seat of their pants in that original trilogy. And seeing where they're at now, where they've got bigger worries, also, like stuff going on with their families, stuff going on in politics. That's stuff that's very, very important. And it's something that's going to happen to everyone in life, I think. Once you get older and you realize it's not all fun and games, we actually have to do work now. And I think that's something that this series does really, really great by aging these characters up. It makes them, if you wanted to feel a little more adult, I think that this is going to be something that's for you. Now, yes, of course, the violence and stuff like that is kind of cranked up much more in this. And the series does get more grim from this point on, and I think that's something we're going to talk about a lot here. But I do think that showing the atrocities of war, and that we've been going through this war that we thought our characters had won, and see that we're still in this battle. Just because, we took down the Sovereign doesn't mean, guys, that everything's just hunky-dory now. There's still a lot of work to do. The Ash Lord is still a pain in everyone's ass, and we see those things. And when you see those atrocities of war, guys, the violence level is going to tick up just a bit. Because we saw like individual battles, but this is where you start seeing full-scale battles and events that happen that are cataclysmic to everybody involved. And you start playing that numbers game. Would you kill 10,000 people to save 100,000? This answers some of those tough questions, or ask a lot of those tough questions, and the answers might not be what you're expecting. But I think with this, the pacing's a touch different. And I actually kind of like this. If you notice, the book, it is a little thicker than those first three, and it just keeps getting that way, because I think that one of the criticisms I heard is people who read a lot of epic fantasy that were reading this series off my recommendation were saying it's just so fast-paced. It's such breakneck pacing. I feel like I don't know what to do, because a lot of fantasy is slow burn. It is taking the time to build the world. It is taking the time to describe that hill for you. A lot of fantasy authors are really good at that. So when they switch to Red Rising, they think, this is really, really fast paced. Well, with this, he slows it down a little bit. He does come up for air. He does build out the solar system a little bit. He does get into the inner workings of politics, some of the families, all those things. And I think that was a big change for some people that really, really liked the pacing of those first three, is he does slow it down a little bit. He does take that Frank Herbert kind of sci-fantasy approach of, yes, this is very much science fiction, but we're going to add a little bit of fantasy elements in there to kind of welcome those readers into the realm of possibility here. So I think that that's a good thing, and I think that's why I, in many ways, prefer the sequels to the originals, because he does take his time to develop some things. That way, when you get those big payoffs, there's so much worth it, so much more worth it. But again, slower, I think, than the original trilogy, but I want to let you guys know it's never boring. It's never boring. You get to the point where you're feeling like, okay, wow, there's been talking for 3 chapters in a row. I'm not used to this in a Red Rising book, but it's always building and building, because you do have 4 different POVs, and they're all in different places, guys. They're almost never standing next to each other. That's another great thing. So you are building up 4 separate arcs here for the big, crazy, epic finale. And so it may feel like sometimes like, wow, I'm not used to this type of pacing from a Pierce Brown book, but it makes it so much better. And guys, and all that stuff that you loved about the original trilogy, it's still in here. I think he finds a way to make this feel fresh but familiar. It never really does. You're not going to be like, am I reading the same series anymore? You're just going to feel like, wow, it's a little bit of a different tempo. And I think it's for the better here. It expands that sandbox a little bit. He takes us around the solar system a little more. It's not just Mars and Luna. You go to Earth, you go to Mercury, you go to Venus, you go to the outer rim in these books. It's really, really great stuff. And I love that he really does build on all that stuff. So you remember Morning Star, where Darrow visits Romulus Al-Ra out there in the outer rim? You get more of that stuff. And I gotta say, I think that the Moon Lord stuff is probably my favorite parts of this entire book. That is the most Song of Ice and Fire I have read outside of Song of Ice and Fire. I really feel like that whole setup in this book with House Ra, that everything going on in that storyline is so Song of Ice and Fire. It's George R. R. Martin to a T. It's perfect. I don't think that Pierce is as great of a writer as George, but because George is one of the greatest of all time, but Pierce's writing just improves every single book, and it shows with those chapters right there, because I love all that stuff in House Raw. It's so good. It's so good. And give me all that stuff. So if you like that little peek that you got in Morningstar, you're going to love this. You're going to really enjoy what happens here. But I do love that those plot threads that were left open in the original trilogy, they come back big time here. Big time. And it's things that you realize that we've got to live with those consequences of some of the decisions that were made in that third act of Morningstar. Remember the bombing the shipyards of Ganymede? That might come back into play, right? Letting Lysander live? That might come back into play. All these things are here, and you never once feel like, oh, this just feels tacked on. No, he left those things on the reread. I saw. He left these things open. I guess trapdoors, you would call them, if he did decide to return to this universe. He can say that he had no plans to return to this, but when I reread Morningstar, Morningstar, so I was like, this feels like he was leaving those trapdoors there in case he did decide to return here, because it's just, if not, it's just a hell of a lucky chance, because all these plots feel like they were important from the go. They never felt like they were anything that was tacked on. So I really do love that. But I love that it plays with the themes of, are we still the good guys? That's something that you always are going to deal with regime change. When you come to regime change, look, when you're 20 years old, like we were in the earlier books, you think everything is going to be great once you win. Once you're in charge, when you have the keys of the kingdom, everything is going to be smooth, right? But very much Lord of the Flies kind of situation here. What happens when the kids are in control? And when the kids are in control, oh crap, I can see why this is so hard. And it starts playing with those themes of, are we replacing one tyrant with another? And that's a theme that I love. Are we still the good guys? You know, have we become that thing we set out to destroy? And I love it. I love that so much. Regime change is really easy, like I said, when you're a kid. But now that you got to do it, you know, it gets really, really murky, and it's going to get very political. And I got to say, with the in-world politics in this, I feel like he levels up a bit. You had kind of just a touch of inner workings. This, you get really, really hands-on into it. There are certain characters where you are dealing with things in the actual Senate and things like that. There are lots of little subdivisions, I guess you call them, subgroups of people that are, you know, for this and for that. Should we do this? Should we do that? You know, they've set up this whole republic now, and can they keep it? And you can see now how it is, where it's like, okay, well, look, we won at the end of Morningstar, and here we are 10 years later, and we're still fighting this battle. Nothing's really changed for us. What can we do to change that? So you think you're starting to fall out of favor with the people that are actually in charge and have a lot of power. And that's always something fun, I think, to play with. And I gotta say, like, a lot of the secondary characters that you had in the first trilogy, obviously I already mentioned Lysander. I think Cassius really gets some time to shine in this book. Obviously, if you're really a Cassius stan like I was, you're gonna really love what you get here. The Ash Lord, tons of stuff. Seraphina is a character that appeared in Morningstar. Well, she has a central role in this book. And I already mentioned, you know, the Moon Lords, the House Ra. You're going to get lots of stuff there. But several. Harmony Holiday, not Harmony. Holiday gets a much, much bigger role here. And, you know, some of your old returning favorites are going to get some more moments to shine. But they do let some of the characters who were really just background characters or tertiary characters in that first trilogy do get some time here. And again, it just makes this world feel bigger and more important. And everything matters, guys. Now let's talk about maybe the not so good. Now look, these weren't necessarily bad things for me. They might be some things that don't work for you. I think the biggest criticism I've heard of this book is not necessarily that it went multi-POV, but that they didn't like two of the POVs. Now here's the deal. You have all this established universe, three books. You have the characters you love. And then Pierce throws you two new POV characters for this book. And that had a lot of people going to arms crossed, or like, I've got my crew. You know, I don't want any newbies. And Lyria and Ephraim aren't going to work for everyone. All I will tell you guys is that, look, trust in Pierce Brown. He's an amazing character writer. He's going to get you there. Trust the process. Trust the process. But it is hard for a lot of people. Look, I'm not going to lie. I'm not the biggest Lyria fan. I like her chapters because it shows me lots of stuff I want to see and shows me from that other point of view. But, you know, I can understand why people don't like. I never to a point where, like, I hate those chapters so much I just want to skip them. This isn't like some characters that you get in some fantasy POV where you're like, oh, God, not this chapter again. I never feel like that. I think this does lean into the political maneuvering a little more than the original trilogy. So like I said, if you didn't want him to slow things down and kind of get into some of those backroom politics, it might not be a change that you really like. All I can say is he's very good at it. But I can understand if that isn't what you signed up for, you know, after you finish Morningstar. You just love that mile a minute. That might not happen. And yes, it is a longer book. That is one thing. Like I say, he does change the tempo a little bit. But it is more grim. That's something I feel like needs to come out here. As I say, I don't feel like those first three books are, you know, puppy dogs and sunshine. But this one's definitely not rainbows. He does tell you how the sausage is made in a few scenes. Some stuff's going to be very, very violent. And there's going to be some stuff that's very, very difficult to read. And I will tell you guys, it gets darker and darker as it goes along. This is one of those series that I've told everybody is a great introduction to Grimdark. Because he doesn't start Red Rising #1, bam, you're Grimdark. No, he slowly gets you there. It gets darker and darker and darker. And by the time you get to Dark Age, you realize what a perfectly named book. Because it really, really is an apt description. So that is something I want to make sure that you know. Trigger warning there that the violence is cranked up here. and it is going to visit a lot of grimdark themes, because even the characters that you think were your heroes, they're going to be doing more and more gray things. They're going to keep pushing that slider to the middle of the bar here, and you're going to start thinking, wow, are they still the good guys? That's something that this really, really does tackle. So why should you read Iron Gold, guys? Well, see my video called Should You Read the Red Rising Sequels? Look, I think yes, but I am going to admit it's not for everybody. It's not going to be for everybody. There are a lot of people who start this book and never finish it. And they say it's not just because I was happy with where it ended. It's just it was just such a change that they didn't like it. And they just kind of bounce. And I do think a lot of it is because of those two new POV characters. I tell you, just trust the process. Like I said, Pierce will get you there. But it's just one of those things that's not going to click for everybody. So I understand that. But if you want to find out what happens after Happily Ever After, I think this is a great, great example of that. Because it will say, look, you know where Morningstar ended, and you think everything's great. Well, this shows you, maybe best laid plans don't go as well as we thought they were. And that's something that it's just life, guys. And it may sound a little jaded, like I said, but that's one word I would use to describe this book and its characters, is they are very, very jaded with what has been going on. They're tired. They're beat down. And it's time to make some big, big decisions. We're at a crossroads here. But if that's something you're not really into, it might not work. But if you're into a more mature approach to these characters, because like I said, they are in their 30s now, they do have kids, they do have real life responsibilities, as long as the weight of the solar system on their backs, I think it's going to be something you really, really like as a character study. Because like I said, these characters do keep getting pushed more and more into the gray area of the moral slider. So if you like grimdark, guys, this is going to be it. This is where I start feeling like, oh, Joe read Pierce read some Joe Abercrombie, and he said, how do I get some of that into my story? And I don't know if this was always the plan, was for him to make it darker and darker, but I do feel like Pierce himself became a little bit more of a mature writer and got a little bit more into darker themes, and he went to kind of experiment with some of those, because it gets to the point, guys, at one point in this series, in these sequel series, where I do say, is Joe Abercrombie ghostwriting this? Because holy hell. So yeah, if you like those things, you're going to enjoy it. But as for my final thoughts, guys, look, I loved all the stuff that happened off of Mars and Luna. All the stuff out there in the Outer Rim was awesome. All the stuff that happens with the Ash Lord, excellent, excellent stuff. It's so good. And I'm not saying the rest of the book wasn't. I'm just saying that stuff really, really stood out to me the first time, and I liked it even more this time. And I was glad to confirm, going back to it this time, that this was stuff that was really, really excellent. And I do appreciate that a lot of first-timers, they're still with it. They're liking it. They did have a rough start, just like I said, but they trusted the process, and they're quite happy with it. And then there are others who read this, or they're doing a reread, and they didn't like Iron Gold the first time, and they liked it a lot more this time around. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a divisive book for some people. For me, it was just what I wanted. I wanted the series to grow up a little bit. I wanted a little bit more sci-fantasy kind of injected in there. I wanted a little bit more, Game of Houses kind of thing, and we do that. We do all that stuff. So I just felt like the stuff out there in the Outer Rim, the Moon Lords, was just amazing, amazing stuff. And I hope there's more of it in Dark Age. Lastly, guys, I love that this book asks those hard questions like I talked about earlier. That's stuff that I will never get tired of. I always am enamored when you go through anything, any kind of historical text of any kind of nation, and you hear about regime change, and you hear about, oh, this side was fighting for what they believe was right, and then they ended up making the same mistakes. That's stuff that just fascinates me. History can and will repeat itself. Are we doomed to that fate? These are great, great questions that it asks, and I love it for it. Guys, I don't know when the spoiler talk's coming. I got a stomach bug, so I got kind of behind on some things, so I feel like I'm a full week behind on all my plans. So I've actually, in an email thread right now with Ben and Aaron about when we're going to do that spoiler talk. We are still going to do it. I just don't know when, because this weekend we're taking the family on a vacation. So the schedule's just going to be all over the place here pretty soon. But that will be happening before I get into my coverage of Dark Age. But I am very, very excited, because I am starting Dark Age on the 1st. And of all these books, that's the one that I've been the most excited to reread, because so much happens in Dark Age. I can barely remember half of it, because so much stuff happens in that book. But guys, Iron Gold, did it exceed your expectations? Were you let down a little bit? Let me know down in the comments. There are no wrong answers, and I will talk to you there.